Hello, everyone. Haven't done a video for a while. I wanted to do this video before December 25th, which is Christmas time. I know this is going to be just a delicate topic, and yeah, it's not necessarily well known. It's not taught in churches, and you have to have a bit of understanding of the Jewish backgrounds of feast days. So we're gonna talk about the feast days of the Bible and the feast days that are pagan and should not be observed by believers. This is a really important topic, and the main point I hope to drive home is that God is actually a jealous God, and you have to worship Him the right way. We have to do the commandments commanded of us and not those that are not commanded of us. This is a really important concept I have to drive home. We cannot mix pagan practices and things in the worship to God. This is a serious offense. It brings about the anger of God and the wrath of God and judgment of God upon any soul that does so. And so this is a really important point. I can't say it enough. This is really important. We have to observe and understand the feast days that are biblical and the ones that are not, and to remove totally all pagan idolatrous practices in our worship to God, because it won't be accepted by God, and it's just really a bad idea, as we'll see in a short while. So we want to talk about the first holiday, which was instituted, which was to do with the first Passover. And that was regarding where the angels passed over the doors of the Israelites, and all of the firstborn of the Egyptians were killed that night. And that was what led to the exodus of the Jewish people, the Hebrew people, out of the land of Egypt, sorry. So this is this is the very first feast day that God told the Israelite people to observe. So we're going to start it up in Exodus chapter 12.
Yes, I'd like to point out what feast day this is. The feast day that God instituted that we're going to read about is called Passover. So we do a lot of celebrating of Passover when we do communion and remember what Jesus did for us. Every time we take the communion, it's a type and form of Passover. But we need to understand that it was truly instituted by God and when. So I'm going to read about it in Exodus 12, verse 12. For I will pass through the land of Egypt this night, and will smite all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and against all the gods of Egypt I'll execute judgment. I am the Lord. And the blood shall be to you for a token upon the houses where you are. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you, and the plague shall not be upon you to destroy you, when I smite the land of Egypt. And this day shall be unto you for a memorial, and ye shall keep it a feast to the Lord throughout your generations. Ye shall keep it a feast by an ordinance forever. I'll just let my brother explain the importance of this last verse.
So the Israelites were commanded by God to observe this forever. And so this is something that is a feast day that we must observe as believers. It's not an optional, guys. And so that's why it's so important to understand communion and understand that Yeshua was the Lamb of God. And so he was the literal fulfillment of the Passover feast day. But as we clearly see in that verse, it is something that we must continue to observe. And so that's why it's the language takes us this. So this is a biblical feast day that must be done even by believers. Okay, so that's the main point here, and so that's the first one that was instituted, and we can see the language. Let's pay attention to the language that it must be observed forever. And so we want to continue actually. Verse 15 to 19 talks about the second.
But before we go there, I'm going to explain to you what day this feast day of Passover is celebrated on. It says, "This month shall be unto you the beginning of months, and it shall be the first month of the year to you." That's verse 2 of chapter 12. So it's actually the first day and the first feast day in the Jewish Israelite calendar and their new year. This is their new year. But it's not on the day that we would think, or we might think. I'm going to let my brother explain that. Because it's important that we know when the Israelite and Jewish New Year starts, so that we can celebrate these feast days on the correct days and months. So I'll let my brother explain this a little bit better.
So we have to understand something. There's been a huge misunderstanding and a problem with the modern Jewish calendar as opposed to the old Jewish calendar, which was a lunar calendar with the new moons. So the problem is that the Talmudic rabbinical Judaism, or Jews that celebrate the new year, celebrate on the wrong month and time. So the true Jewish New Year, as we can clearly see in the Torah, the first 5 books, is very clear. It's said, this is the first month for you. This is the beginning, it said. So that's an important point to make. That the Jewish New Year is actually during the time of Passover. It is the beginning of the Jewish New Year, not in September. It is not the beginning of the Jewish New Year. September is not the beginning. The Day of Atonement is not the beginning of the Jewish New Year. That is incorrect. So we have to understand that the beginning of the Jewish New Year actually starts in the spring. And it says it's the first day of Nisan, which in our calendars now is around April the 1st, okay? And so that's really important to understand, that the Jewish New Year is actually in the spring. And this is where our first holidays and feast days that were instituted by God were done, was this time. So that's really important point to make. So yeah, thanks for reminding me about that.
So when we have this reference point now of when the Jewish Israelite calendar begins, when the year begins, now we have the proper reference point for the other 6 major feast days that God instituted in His Word, which we're going to go through, and God willing, if time permits, at some later date. But we're just going to address the next one here. And this is the second one, called the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So I'll get my brother to read about the Feast of Unleavened Bread.
So we're going to continue in Exodus 12. It talks right after. It says, 7 days shall you eat unleavened bread, even the first day. You shall put away leaven out of your houses. For whatsoever eateth leavened bread from the first day until the 7th day, that soul shall be cut off from Israel. This is a serious thing. So when God expected them to do as commanded, they had to do exactly to every detail. This is important. That's why we can't mix pagan practices in with these feast days that God instituted. We can clearly see there's no room for that. And if they did, they would have been put to death. So continuing. So it says here, and in the first day, there shall be a holy convocation. And in the 7th day, there shall be another holy convocation to you. No manner of work shall be done in them, save that which every man must eat, that only may be done of you. And you shall observe the feast of unleavened bread, for in this selfsame day have I brought your armies out of the land of Egypt. Therefore shall you observe the day in your generations by an ordinance forever. So there you go. Something that I really came to understand, that, again, now this is the second holiday that God has instituted as an ordinance, as it says, forever. So this talks about, it signifies in a shadow, yes, of sin being, we are our souls being now freed from sin, from the Lamb of God on Passover, that we're freed from sin and we're out of the land of Egypt in the world and darkness of sin and death. And now, because of we can come to the bread of life, which is Yeshua Christ. And so this is a really important understanding. So again, as we can see with the first holiday and feast day, Yeshua fulfilled it. We can see in the second one as well how Yeshua fulfilled this feast day as well. So it's an ordinance forever, and we realize that Jesus, Yeshua Christ, has also done and fulfilled this holiday or feast day as well. Now, I don't want to put people under law, but you're not sinning if you observe these feast days in the time of the Jewish times that they are allotted. Actually, I think it's a good idea, actually, to do it. But we don't need to be lawful about it. And you're not sinning if you don't do it. But there's another thing we have to understand is about Sabbath days. As it says there, every feast day, most feast days, as you can clearly see, it's on a Sabbath, which was Saturday, not Sunday. And these Sabbaths, you are not supposed to work in them. So again, Sabbaths are very key to understanding feast days and how Sunday was instituted by the Roman Catholic Church in the 300s AD. So before that, most of the churches in the early church would have actually had their main service on Saturday, not Sunday. So that's really important to also say here. So, but I also don't want people to feel like they're under law. But I think it's a good idea to remember these feast days.
Well, it's actually saying that we should observe it forever.
Correct.
So, the wise and healthy thing to do is to observe the feast days that God has commanded. It's not difficult to do it. God made it where we can do it, and He gives us the ability to. So we do it not because we're under law, because we want to please God, because we love God and want to please Him, and we want to do things that pleases God. This is why we do these things. So I want to encourage anybody that we want to do these feast days and observe them, not out of law, but out of love towards God, that we want to please Him. This is a motivation we want to have when we look at these things. I want to point that out as well. But before I leave this feast day here, I'd like to tell us when that's celebrated. It's in verse 18. It's in the first month, on the 14th day of the month at even. And ye shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month at even. So it's still the first month. It's from the 14th to the 21st of the same month. So this is why we need to critically understand when the first feast day is, so then we know that the second is celebrated on the 14th of the same month. And so this is the second feast day. But now we're going to address what happens when we don't observe and celebrate God's instituted feast days. So there's blessing and no need to be lawful, but we do it to please God. But there's ways that we can do feast days that anger God and displease God. So now we're going to read about that.
So I think what we have to say is I want to just quickly talk about the 7 feast days. Okay, so the third one is Shavuot or Pentecost. Okay, that's 50 days from the end of the unleavened bread feast day. So that brings us to they have 50 days in there. So obviously then that takes us to around the beginning of June for the time of Pentecost, which is the harvest festival. The first fruits is another name for it. And that's when the law of God came down from Mount Sinai, and it talks about the fire coming down. And then we have Pentecost in the New Testament having the same fire, but a different the fire being the Holy Spirit coming down upon the people dwelling inside. And there was that outward showing. So this is that first fruits. It's a celebration festival or feast day. So that's the third one. Now, so we have a bit of time after that, Pentecost. So we come up to the next holiday, which is the Feast of Trumpets. And the Feast of Trumpets is the most unknown feast day in the entire calendar. And modern Jews don't even know what you're talking about. If you say like Happy Yom Teruah, I think it's called Teruah. I can't say how, my Hebrew's not very good. But that's the Feast of Trumpets. And if you say Happy Feast of Trumpets in Israel, they'll look at you like, what are you talking about? So it's very unknown. And so I'm not going to talk too much about it, but the trumpet is what heralds in the Lord's return. And so this Feast of Trumpets will not be fulfilled until the day of Yeshua's second coming. Then we have the 5th holiday, which is in now the modern Jewish calendar. They consider this the Jewish New Year. It was the Day of Atonement. The Day of Atonement is where the sin offering was made for all of Israel. And so this was considered their most important feast day of all, was actually Yom Kippur. They're talking about the Day of Atonement, really was the most important one that they had and is the one that they spend the most on. And this is a time where the people are supposed to be repentant, considering their sin and giving it to God as a sin offering for everyone's sins to be atoned for that year. And now we know again that the feast of this feast day or Day of Atonement has been fulfilled through Yeshua Christ very clearly. Okay, very clearly that what is said that his blood sacrifice was done once for all in Hebrews. You can see that it was done once for all. So there's no need for any masses. No need to have another sin offering made like the masses are done in Catholic churches and other churches today with priests. This is done away with. We can clearly see that in Hebrews. So this is a problem. So you cannot mix and do profane sacrifices and sin offerings when Yeshua Christ did that one offering for all. This is something really important to say here.
This is what the Bible talks is equivalent to offering profane fire. When you're making offerings for things like for sin, Jesus provided that. So it's fulfilled through Christ. So we'll move on to the next feast day.
So the next one is the Feast of Tabernacles. Now this feast day again, it's also a very interesting feast day. This is also where they have booths, where you're supposed to spend time with God. And we know that this Feast of Tabernacles will be fully fulfilled when Yeshua comes and rules he comes back and rules and reigns out of Jerusalem. And the church will rule and reign with him. And so this is going to be a wonderful time to see this fulfilled fully in his second coming. And then we have the last one, which is very interesting as well. It's called the 8th day. And so that's going to be where after the millennial reign, everything will be made anew. Eighth day means the beginning, a new beginning. So new heavens, new earth, the Lord dwelling with us, amongst us. So this is the beginning of all things, the beginning of a new plan of God. So this is why there's 7 feast days, and 7 is a very important number, which means it's completeness. And so it's not a coincidence that there's only 7 feast days that God has instituted in the Torah. So Hanukkah, bar mitzvahs, and Christmas and Easter. Easter in the way that it's celebrated with mixing with pagan things, and same with Christmas. And then you have Hanukkah again. It has the same problem as Christmas and Easter does. And so that's where we're going to get into it in a minute here. I hope we don't have much time, and we want to get through with that. Okay, so we're going to talk about the golden calf.
And then we're going to leave it there, and then we'll continue this discussion in another video. What scripture is
Exodus
that
32.
All right. I'll let my brother read it.
So Exodus 32, we have the golden calf. So this is actually the time of actual Pentecost. Again, God was on the mount, and then so I'm gonna take it up. So let's see, where should I take it up here? Okay. And they received them at their hand and fashioned it with a graven tool after he had made it a molten calf. And they said, "These be thy gods, O Israel, which brought thee up out of the land of Egypt." And when Aaron saw it, built an altar before it, and Aaron made proclamation and said, "Tomorrow is a feast to the Lord." And they rose up early on the morrow and offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings. And the people sat down to eat and to drink and rose up to play. And the Lord said unto Moses, "Go, get thee down, for thy people, which I brought out of the land of Egypt, have corrupted themselves. They have turned aside quickly out of the way which I commanded them. They have made them a molten calf, and have worshipped it, and have sacrificed thereon, and said, These be thy gods, O Israel, which have brought thee up out of the land of Egypt." So he said, "I've seen these people, and behold, they are a stiff-necked people, stiff-necked. And therefore let me alone, when my wrath may wax hot against them, and I may consume them, and I will make of thee a great nation." That's talking about Moses. He was going to start over with a new. So this is a serious problem. And it's talking about the wrath of God being brought upon the people. And Moses had to talk him down. But this is the main point here. It brings upon the wrath of God when we mix pagan worship with God. They were saying, "Oh, this be our gods." And they knew full well that they were trying to use this golden calf in worship to God, and they made a feast day of it. They made a feast day unto the Lord of it. And that's what we're doing if we do mix pagan practices with our worship to God for a feast day, with a feast day. But it wasn't instituted by God. God did not command them to fashion a golden calf to worship God and make a feast day. Did not command them to do so. And this is the difference. This is a stark difference between Passover and unleavened bread and this one, and Pentecost versus this feast day of the Lord with the golden calf. I hope we see the difference.
Yes. And there's a mixture of fashioning idols, the practice and fashioning of idols, the practices of setting up idolatry and worship of idols. And it is like called and instituted as a feast day unto the Lord. This is the greatest sin of idolatry that the Israel or anybody can commit against God.
I was just going to finish with
It's so serious that God was going to wipe out the Israelite nation right there. So when we do idolatry in the name of the Lord and a feast day for the Lord, as an idolatry, this practice and the idols, we're tempting the Lord to destroy us.
Okay, so I want to just finish off in Deuteronomy 4. This is really important. I don't know, maybe Deuteronomy 6, but 4 will nail the point home here. So, verse 4, Deuteronomy 4, verse 1. Now therefore hearken, O Israel, unto the statutes and unto thy judgments, which I teach you, for to do them, that ye may live, and go in and possess the land which the Lord God of your fathers giveth you. Ye shall not add unto the word which I command you, neither shall you diminish aught from it, that ye may keep the commandments of the Lord your God, which I command you. Very important. We don't add commandments, aka Christmas. That's an addition. We were not commanded to celebrate Jesus' birthday. That's an addition. Nor should we diminish from it. So we're taking away Feast of Trumpets, we're diminishing. So this is important that we understand this. Very important godly concept. We have to do what we're commanded, not things that we're not. And we don't subtract from what's commanded either. So this is important. That's why there's no room for pagan practices in it. And I'd like to, that should do it. I think that's where I want to leave it. I think that's a good, perfect place to end this video. And
yes, for the sake of the love of everyone's souls, I implore anybody and everybody, let's just simply do what the word commands and be blessed. So everyone be blessed and enjoy the blessing and commandments of God and doing it to please God. It's pleasurable to the Lord that we do that.
All right. God bless. Take care.